Welcome, everybody. Good Monday morning, or good Monday afternoon.
No,
Yeah, start at, I want a replay of today.
Happy Monday.
Welcome. So why don't we go ahead and get started. This is hopefully will be our last budget markup, both on the budget and the CIP. So council members, this is your opportunity to ask questions, make changes, and then there was a couple items which I think staff was going to look into on the general government operating budget and get back to us. So perhaps that might be a good place to start.
Okay. The first, just for documents, what we have are hard copies of the markup spreadsheet that where we landed on Thursday evening. And
Did those go around?
Let me pass them around. Here's one for you. Here, take the whole stack.
Richard, provide me one too.
Oh my gosh.
I have that effect on them. What can I say? It's the way it is. Yeah, I agree.
So there were some follow-up questions from council on this spreadsheet specifically, to come back to council if there were concerns about the reductions to the police cars and the part-time fire marshal, and the police chief was briefed on those prior to last Thursday night, so there's no new information on those two items. The council also asked for information about the workload for our existing planning staff in terms of current planning that is underway, and that's in the context of if we're providing additional resources, are our existing resources fully occupied. What I sent out was the Planning Commission's annual report, which lists in a very concise way kind of all the major projects that went through the planning department in the past year, and those included the Gateway project, as well as several amendments to our SEs and a number of other development projects, and those are all listed in that report. And looking ahead to the coming year, we do have a number of projects that we're working on with developers that are in their planning phase to bring those forward. So we do anticipate that our current planning shop will be fully occupied this year. But I'd be happy to answer any questions or take any further comment on that. There's also, shifting towards the capital improvements program, there was comment, I think, at the last council meeting from the school board about the potential use for this building, City Hall, as a future school site. And I've asked the superintendent to clarify whether there are any existing plans that the schools are working on that reference that as an option. And I'll acknowledge that it has been discussed in the past, but it's been really principally discussed in the context of if we're doing city center development, could there be some usefulness to having city offices as an incentive to a commercial developer to build a new commercial office building in our city center area if they could pre-lease some government office space. That's usually been the driver of that discussion. And then on the back end of it, well, what would we do with this campus, and could it be used as a schools? That's my personal experience with the nature of that as an option. I do think that there are enormous costs associated with it. Dewberry looked at it in a very high level, 50,000 foot level in terms of their initial space options. And really, what the equation would be moving into new, more expensive space as a lessor versus being right now in fully depreciated space as a landowner. Certainly there are capital liabilities associated with that, but I think from an operating cost structure, where we are is the most cost effective. The question would be, could it be, as part of some massive redevelopment, could the injection of public office space be an incentive that ends up being a net winner. And we haven't done all that analysis. I really think it's been mostly at the discussion level and never got much beyond that. So that's a brief acknowledgement of that item. Where we are, though, is written acknowledgement from the schools that that's not part of their facility plan as it is right now.
Great. And I think that there was one other question that we had on the employee salary levels, whether it made sense to do a bump in one calendar year and then another in the next calendar year. Still getting to the same point. So staff was going to take a look at the numbers and discuss it with employees and get back to us as well.
Well, I think at this point that is a council decision. The rationale for the compensation or the sort of the data behind the compensation decision has been presented before, and I don't think we need to revisit it. So I think at this point it's just a question of where the council is on it. In terms of the long-range impact, either way it is at the end of the year would be 5.5%. So I think the real policy question is, if the council were to choose to say, revenues have to be coming in at X amount in order for that January 1st increase in pay to occur, I think that would be the policy rationale behind it. I think with the numbers that we're looking at right now, I feel comfortable with the 5.5% from a revenue perspective or from a multi-year or long-range risk management perspective, counterbalanced by the issues that we've raised already about where we've been for the past 3 or 4 years on employee compensation.
And I think there was one other question that I had and that was looking at the regional CIP and seeing how that fits on the overlay of the last 4 years where we've frozen salaries and seeing what that trend looks like. Do we have that?
I'm sorry, the Regional Capital Improvement Program? Or,
No.
the
CPI.
I'm sorry,
CPI.
CPI.
Yes. I have not brought that number to this meeting, and I need to bring that. We do have it, and I need to forward that to council.
Okay. Do you know roughly what it looks like? Is it higher than what we're proposing as far as the salary goes?
The number that I can recall off the top of my head was the Fair Labor Bureau, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers for the Washington metropolitan wage increases since 2009, and those have been 8% for our region. CPI is a number I need to provide you. I have not done the tally for that 3-year period.
All right. Why don't we go around? Ira?
On everything?
Yeah, why don't we just stick with operating budget, so with the items that we've covered so far?
Regarding the, thank you for the explanation and for pursuing this issue with microphone, please. Jones. Regarding the possible use of city land, it still remains, what I'm more concerned about is the fact that we have, $8 or $9 million coming up in the next 2 years, and I don't want to see expenditures on that if there are plans floating around that would in fact make that waste. So I think we need more certainty that for the next 10 years, whatever it takes to amortize the bulk of these bonds, nothing is going to happen. There will be no exchange of land. There will be nothing that's going to change us. Otherwise, it makes no sense to go forward with the rehabilitation and improvements in City Hall.
I think the cleanest answer to that really is the first Dewberry study that was presented to the council in 2008, I think, and they did take that initial look of, well, what makes the most sense? Expand on site, move to a new site, do a partnership with a developer in our downtown area. And part of that 2008 analysis was the most cost-effective solution was to stay here. That was really a city council discussion, and I have not heard any serious proposals from the schools that they have plans for this facility.
However, right now, all they have said is that they don't have any current plans, but next year they could have a plan, right? So we're still spending money. Your view, as I understand, is that that's a council decision whether we would consider that or not. What would be required to put more teeth in the view that we should not entertain land swaps, land sales, or anything for some time period? What are the bonds you plan to issue for this? By 15-year bonds, Richard? 20 years?
At least.
Well, then I would think, I'd have to look at the average life, but it would be then between 10 and 15 years before it would make sense to even talk about it, and even in that case, it would be very problematic. Something that protects this investment that we're about to commit. Would that be a council motion or what?
If the council wanted to declare that, the council could do that on its own motion. It would, yeah, I mean, I think clarity on that point would come with the investment in this facility. I mean, I think that the two are intrinsically linked, but to fully clarify that, that could be phrased in the form of a resolution and say this is the council's intent.
When would we do that?
Potentially do it as part of the CIP. I guess the way that I view it is the CIP is that document that lays out what the policy is. But we could perhaps put more clarifying language in the CIP.
Well, but it can get revised every year.
That's exactly. I mean, the next year it can be changed.
So this is an open exposure?
I-
We're just going to take the risk?
That's not what I'm saying.
Just so you know, on the school side, what they've been talking about for 5 years, since I was there, not this year, but the 4 years prior, the whole reason they did the 20-year facility study was to avoid the exact problem you're talking about, because they had never. Virginia doesn't require 20-year plans, as near as I can tell. In Maryland, it was a requirement that we had to plan 20 years out, and every year you update the plan. And so that's why they did a total assessment of the facilities, and there were a number of different scenarios, and they spent a couple years debating what they want to do. They apparently have settled on this course of action as what they want to do, of having the separate elementary schools and then doing something for that price tag to solve the high school problem, and that's the current status. Now, it doesn't mean if they all get thrown out of office and new people come in, it won't all change instantly after the election. We don't know that.
I understand. Forgive the ping pong. But the issue wouldn't be that we'd ask the school board for a statement for 20, that this council would say, as far as we're concerned, this would be for the next 10 or 15 years, that we're not prepared.
Well, our role in it is the funding. I mean, our role is not to decide what are the appropriate facilities for the school system. That's why we have an elected school board.
Wait a second. So we could pass that, and then they would come back and say, that doesn't matter, we want it because you just paid for it?
If we decide not to fund it, they can't do it. So I don't think school systems they have their own bonding authority in Virginia. They do in Maryland, but they don't here. So it's you got a little more control than you do in other states. But just like after the council election, you could get new people in here who totally want to go in a different direction, just like we did for a number of things that the prior council didn't want to do. You can't control that. I mean, John would tell you can't control things and bind them down the road no matter what we pass, unless you put some sort of charter amendment in that makes it really hard to undo it. I'm just explaining the situation. I mean, we could pass something and it would have as much effect until the council reverses it.
Ira?
But I still would feel better. I accept what you're saying. Everything is reversible in the future, but I wouldn't mind adding another step to that reversal process. $7 or $8 million commitment right now is a big deal. That's a big deal for the city, and I think that investment, we should do what we can under our auspices to try to make sure that that investment is honored and protected, and therefore we get the maximum use out of it. What happens in the distant future, certainly we don't know.
Why don't we try this? If Mr. Kalen and staff can try to work up some language to put in the CIP that's not in there, making it clear what the intent is, understanding that,
Ring fence it a little bit.
yeah, ring fence it, with the understanding that we just had that it could get changed, and that's just the nature of.
We don't need to understand that, that will come
Yeah.
later.
So I think it's really going to be the investment that's going to control a lot of it. But I agree with Mr. Kalen. We don't want to go down the issues of building and doing improvements to the city hall only to do something later on, like tearing down the building for some other purpose, whether it be a school or something else. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think now it's the time to decide, since we're planning on investing in city hall. So, all right. Anything else, Mr. Kellen? Okay. Joanna?
I actually have a constellation of questions on the whole lead certification issue and as it affects the CIP, on the employment compensation, and on the school CIP. So how should I address those? Just boom, boom, boom,
right,
or?
Let's take them in order.
Okay. Lead certification. This has been a delightful dance that we've had with the Planning Commission, with ESC, with school staff. And as I indicated to Dr. Jones and to city staff, I continue to think that this is an important piece that needs to be woven into the fabric of what we're doing in this city, both economically and environmentally. So I understand that lead resolution language has already been circulated. I've seen a copy of it. So my question is, what does it take to deploy that language? Is it possible to have that language before council on the 23rd, before we adopt the CIP, so that it in fact is in play for FY13? Or does it need to go through a process that I am unaware of? So that's question number one.
Councilmember Barry, you are correct. There is draft language that has been drafted by, I think, members of the Climate Task Force, Climate Change Task Force. What we have not yet been able to do is a sort of a bigger picture analysis of how this would fit in with the city's overall community energy plan, which we have suspended while we're trying to work through our utility issues. I think for the policy to have real staying power, it would be useful to have that understanding of what the implications of it would be, and cost calculations, but also just a review of different options and how this fits in with the city's overall goals for sustainability. But if the council doesn't want to do that larger look and have that analysis, we can try to work with that draft and get that teed up for council action. The risk of that approach could be that, 6 months down the road, or when we're kind of hit the rubbing points of that policy, whether it has the type of sort of deep support that a policy like that you would ideally want to have.
And the reason I obviously bring this to everybody's attention is that our boards and commissions, are chock-a-block with extraordinarily talented men and women who live and breathe this issue, as you well know, for a living. And I am not immune to the fact that in adopting this language, there are immediate financial knock-on effects. So I don't do this casually. I am willing, if the rest of council feels this way, I am willing to suspend the conversation until April 30th, when Planning Commission finally can weigh in on it. But I do so with the full knowledge that if we don't approve it on April 23rd, that means that nothing in the FY13 CIP is governed by that language. Specifically, Mary Ellen Henderson, Thomas Jefferson, and some of the city infrastructure. So I say this knowing that there is a time sensitivity. However, I also say this understanding that there is that a plan of heft and a robust plan is important. So I'm willing to be guided by the rest of council, but I don't want it to slip a whole lot further, because in FY14 and onward we have some significant CIP issues that I think must be guided by this language. So I would rather see it on April 23rd, because I have seen it. It's in fairly good draft. It's been viewed by some talented folk, but again, I won't press it too hard, but I won't press it. I really don't want to see it go past April 30th, or to be deployed by the time we consider FY14 major CIP initiatives. Oh, okay.
Why don't we pause for a moment and just get council reactions?
I think Johanna's right. I mean, we need to deal with the issue one way or the other, and figure out where we stand on it if it's going to factor into so many decisions. Everyone acknowledges there's a price tag attached to it, and I think we have to have the debate whether everybody agrees it's worth it or not worth it to make that requirement. There may be some, I don't know if there are differences of opinion, or we might all agree, but we need to deal with that sooner rather than later, it seems like.
Other council members? Dave?
I'm in total agreement with the basic objective, which is to set high environmental standards for our buildings. But LEED certification carries with it an extraordinary overhead cost, which the schools have calculated with regard to, I think it was TJ, which I've been advised in prior projects by private developers, a very, very high overhead cost. So one approach that we may want to follow, and I would ask Councilmember Berry if she'd consider this, is some sort of language along the lines of LEED certification or its functional equivalent in terms of environmental outcomes. The reason why I say that, again, is LEED was basically started in the building industry. In fact, their headquarters is in the same building I work in downtown Washington. I've toured through their facilities. There is a very high certification cost and a very high cost with that I think experts could tell you could achieve the environmental benefits without the certification and other costs. So I would urge that we find a way to both achieve our environmental goals, but not end up with extraordinarily high overhead costs that come with LEED certification, apparently in some circumstances. And I think the schools have already documented those numbers. It's tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get the certification, never mind what it is that you're achieving in terms of environmental benefits. So I would just suggest some more work on that particular issue so that we get the outcomes we want, but at a better cost than LEED certification in every case.
I think that we may be slipping a bit into merits, and I was hoping that we'd have a bit of a discussion about process and when to actually take the issue up. So
Oh, okay.
I think that's what we're trying to get a sense of from council right now.
So whether we take it up on April 23rd
Whether we
or
try to
April,
somehow take it up
have
prior
guiding
to
language
the-
on April 23rd
Yeah.
or after.
Exactly. So I think that's really the issue is, do we want to try to take this up before or at the same time as the CIP, or do we want to try to take it up shortly after the CIP? I think that's the question that's on the table.
Well, and if I were to fling up a hand right now, I would say take it up at the time of the CIP on the 23rd, only because I have seen the language. It is thoughtful. It's gone through boards and commissions. I am very sensitive and very much appreciate Mr. Snyder's concerns about the hegemony, however we describe it, of LEED certification, because it's quite right. You know, it has been it has dominated the field. My concern about playing around the edges with this is that it is a well understood, well respected third-party standard, and it's sort of like saying, well, I got a degree from Harvard, but not quite, because I didn't actually, either you got the degree from Harvard or you didn't get the degree from Harvard. But, I'm absolutely, I get it. And it's something I've talked with boards and commissions about, and what we do about it. At the other issue, and I'm glad Mr. Snyder brought this up because it was of concern to me as well, is that in the correspondence, and we need to share it, I think, Cindy, we need to share it with the rest of council, the lead costs, both from the schools and on the city side, have been challenged by boards and commissions. I think Cindy, in the spirit of being cautious, chose the high end of the number to put into the planning documents, but it has been vigorously challenged by people who are in the business, saying, perhaps this number is a little scary. I certainly could not argue that number, but there are lots of people who could, and I think that Cindy, in the spirit of protecting the city, chose a higher number to make certain that she had flexibility. I think that isn't actually the number, but again, I'm just one person who doesn't do this for a living either. Having said all that, and I think Mr. Snyder's made very important points, I would still argue that since we seem to all be, in concordance on the idea of LEEDs, on the intent of LEED, on the intent of third-party certification, if we could take it up on April 23rd and have it as a guiding principle in our CIP from here on out, I would be happy.
Yeah,
Being happy, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I'll throw it out there as well. I do want to try to take it up as soon as we can, but I think council needs to see that language. I don't think all of us have seen the policy language, and to discuss it. And do we have any other, I don't know who's reviewed it, outside of staff, whether
Staff and ESC, right?
ESC has reviewed it.
Planning Commission yet?
No, I don't think the Planning Commission has reviewed it. They're not reviewing it tonight at their meeting, are they?
It's not on their agenda. I don't think they formally reviewed it. Of course, one of their members is
Informally, right.
actively involved, but it's not been formally opined on.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's one of those items that we'd want to take action on before the Planning Commission reviews it, if they haven't.
Typically, what the council would do is take it up, look at it, and say, this is about right, and then refer it out to the boards and commissions for it to get better, or at least be fully vetted before it gets adopted. And that step hasn't happened. But procedurally, I think there'd be two things to do. One would be to take up the resolution, which would be the policy question, if that was the council's choice, and then the other would be to amend the CIP. And what I have heard Mr. Foster say in the past, that a change to the budget would mean we need to start it over for second reading. And we had this discussion at the beginning of the budget as well. Now, that wouldn't be the operating budget. We have the CIP as a separate ordinance, so it would not be holding up the full operating budget, which would be very problematic, but it would be holding up the appropriation in the CIP for FY13 and the 5-year plan, if we were to go that path. What we discussed at the beginning of the budget process, knowing that second reading requirement would be triggered, was, kind of where the staff recommendation was and remains is the FY13 projects. We believe the TJ project is really kind of is down the road, and the City Hall projects that are in FY13 are not eligible. Understand that we need to learn more about that. But on that theory, let's work over the coming months to get a good policy that's solid, and then build our CIP around that for 2014 and beyond. That's what our recommendation was at the time of first reading. So if the council wants to revisit that, that's fine. But so those are the two things that would need to happen.
So it sounds like what we may be able to do is, given where things are at and they're shaping up, there's not we can do both. And really advance when we take up the environmental, whether it's LEEDs or some other organizations. But for shorthand, let's just use LEEDs. We'll take up that policy as soon as possible so it doesn't linger and not get done, and then we're facing another CIP and we're back at it again. So why don't we work that into the calendar? Unfortunately, we don't have the calendar tonight, but
I do
perhaps
have
right,
a
right after
hard
the
copy, but-
right after we pass the budget on the 23rd.
Yeah.
So the next available work session. So we can come back to this and fill out the time while we move on. So, Ms. Barry, anything else?
I have a ton more, but why don't we just
Okay,
go down?
why don't we go down and then come
here,
back again?
because-
Mr. Webb?
Thank you. I guess my question is, I think you answered the one question that I had about the timing of doing the raising, and we had a conversation about that last week as well. And other than that, I think generally with looking over this over the last few days, I've gotten more comfortable with where we are and what we're proposing at this point. So unless something comes up, and then with Ms. Berry's line of questioning, I think I'm there with where we are at.
Thank you. Mr. Preppy?
No, not a whole lot. I mean, just on the issue we just discussed, I do think we need to at least commit to a timeline for addressing the lead issue, because it's not going to go away and it's not going to change. And in the meantime, if people want to come up with different numbers or better numbers, that would probably be helpful. But I'd hate to see it just get put off, and then a year from now, we're kind of back to the same issue again. On the
Ms.
issue,
Barry's
Mr.
on it. I don't think that's happening.
On the issue, Mr. So I'll support you on that as soon as we can do it. But I understand we need to get it out there and move it along. And it's an evolving issue because the standards are all up for changes this year. There's some big changes going on that may affect.
And again,
Some of it.
The work of the boards and commissions, the documents I've seen that have gone between and among the boards and commissions and city staff is very thoughtful language, very good stuff. So thank you, Ron. That'll be.
And as far as Mr. Kalin's issue, maybe what we need to do on what we're committing to is adopt, in theory, some sort of statement of intent about a 20-year plan. I mean, we don't actually formally do that, and that would be, well, that's how you commit to that, and say, that's what most bodies I'm used to, at least that's how we did it in Maryland. We said, here's what we intend to do for the next 20 years, and it does get revisited and tinkered with, but it sets the guidance and everything focuses around that, and it makes staff's job a lot easier rather than just sort of the year by year, which is really kind of the focus now, even though it's a 5-year plan. So maybe that's a way to phrase that.
And the time between actually asking for it and getting it, nothing would be expected to happen, I guess. So if it took a little bit of time to prepare that 20-year plan, that shouldn't interfere.
I think so, because we're adopting a budget now that nothing else can happen other than that until it gets into the next cycle. So as long as we have something ready for it, maybe that's a good way to approach it. And that might start some dialogue. If people really have concerns or the schools have concerns, there's their chance to raise them as part of that process. So
Okay.
maybe that's the way to do it. On the other budget things, it seems like it's all kind of coming together in terms of the phasing in. From what I'm looking at, I understand all the money we're spending is not ours. Let me make that clear. Governments don't make money. Governments take money from people and redistribute it. But to the way things are shaping up now to provide the level of services we want, it seems like things are sorting themselves out. And I don't have a problem giving the increase now if we can make the numbers work. That's what I want to see the
Percent.
bottom line of how that works.
Mr.
Dave?
Snyder?
Thank you. I do appreciate a lot of solid work by the council this year. I think there are 4 components to the budget, I think, in terms of expenditures. I think, first of all, can we give the employees the 5.5% and stay at 127 or lower? I think we can and should. Secondly, we should fully fund the school request, which we have done. Third, we have restored the fund balance. And when you put all that together, you still come up with the ability to cut the tax rate by at least 1 penny, maybe even more, if you don't fund everything the city manager has asked for. And you still have $100,000, which you could build back into one position potentially, or work on some other high priority projects. So I won't vote for a tax level at 127. I think we don't need it, and I think to take it from the taxpayers when you don't need it is unconscionable. I'm sure there are lots of things we'd like to spend it on, just as in our homes, there are lots of things we'd like to do. But this money isn't ours fundamentally. And I don't believe that in this case it's essential to take the 127 after looking at where the revenue projections are. I also think that for those who argue, oh, we need to raise the tax rate now because it'll have to go up in the future, well, that's, first of all, it's open to question. Those are decisions which we make in the future. And I don't agree with holding a tax level artificially high to make it easier to raise it in the future. If it were our money, we could seek to do whatever we want. I recall all too well campaigning 2 years ago when I had people say we're literally pricing them out of their homes as senior citizens, and so I try to keep their interests in mind as I do the employees, the teachers, and everyone else. So I feel a better balance would be struck for all concerns, including the taxpayers, by reducing the rate to 126. And I'll have more to say the night when we actually vote on this, but I didn't want anybody to think that at least there's 100% supporting the approach that seems to be emerging here. Again, the money is there, I believe, to fully fund the schools, to provide the employees the 5.5%, to restore the fund balance. And it's in these other areas where I have strong disagreements and believe the taxpayers ought to come out better in the budget than they do in the majority proposal. Thank you.
Others? Yeah, let's start back again. Mr. Chairman.
That makes sense. My concern, and I'm glad you provided that. Lawrence, could I ask you a favor? Could you just, so I can sort of see where I'm saying? Thanks. My concern with the previous intervention was that there are certain things that are one-time decisions and you can't take back, but there are other programs that can always be reversed and may very well be reversed by future, but you have to start somewhere and you have to do something. Otherwise, we would just be in existential paralysis. Your option makes a lot of sense, and I think I could support that. In terms of the pay increase, I can go along with this, but I would have preferred, but I will not push it, the 4.5%, and then one. I do not share the optimism of some people around this table that the city's financiers are as strong as they seem to believe. My review of the economic and financial data, which is my area of expertise, would suggest that there is a great deal need for caution, and it could be argued that, and I supported the 127 because I did believe we should try to give at least the taxpayers a breather. But it is very, very unclear that the future will not demand more. We don't know. And in fact, the same goes for the issue of the salary increases. It would have been much better business practice to wait on to see if your revenues were going to be as expected before you gave the whole thing. However, companies and so forth do things in stages all the time. However, I understand the situation, and then we can go for it. It is just, in this case, 1%, but it is not the preferred way to do it. I've heard also this issue, let the taxpayers keep their money, why should we take it? Well, 1 cent for an individual taxpayer is one thing, but a 1 cent for people who have had their basements flooded, have had sewage problems, maybe they could use some assistance from the city as well, and it would make more impact on them than a 1 cent divided on around 4,800 households. So I think we should need to make sure we have resources for very urgent needs, and I continue to support the 127 and think it's the appropriate level for this year.
Thank you. Ms. Berry?
Yeah, I have two remaining buckets of issues I wanted to say, and one is just to come right out and talk about the deployment of the 5.5% between the calendar years. That was my original intent. I wanted to see a 5.5 increase, but I wanted to see 4.5 in July and between 0.5 and 1% in January. I wanted to see it split between 2 calendar years, but again, make a commitment such as we could make. In the fiscal year, I continue to think that that is the prudent way to go. You know, I can lose the vote, and that's okay, because I am committed overall to the 5.5. But I think, again, to be prudent, I share Mr. Kalin's concern that, you know, we like the upward trajectory. We are happy with the upward trajectory. I mean, I'm speaking about the royal we now, okay? The royal we are happy with the upward trajectory, but you don't know. And so I would like to have just a bit of indicator, you know, economic indicator in December or January that lets us have some sense of security. I'm just saying that that was my original plan. I can be overruled, but I want to align myself with those who wanted to exercise a little more prudence. So that's that. My last set of issues have to do with the school CIP. And this is a conversation that I've had with Mr. Foster, and I think with Ms. Mester, but I want to just put it out there that the Mount Daniel expansion, the CDC and Mount Daniel expansion, is, in my view, a single project, and it exceeds it comes to exceed, or may exceed, the $6 million, although I understand it's now $6.9 million threshold. But I'm concerned not so much about the numbers, but the intent behind slicing and dicing projects so that they fit underneath a certain threshold. Because I think the whole intent of the 10% threshold was to provide transparency to the citizens who are going to end up paying for this over the years. So I just want to signal that while the letter of the law may be that this was appropriately sliced and diced, to me the spirit of the law still needs to be discussed. That's just one thing I wanted to say. And also within the CIP, and I'm not a mind reader here, and I would like some guidance from the school. I don't need it to make a decision, but I would like guidance from the school, is that there are uncertainties to me because we are dealing with expansions, for instance, in Fairfax County. Mount Daniel sits in Fairfax. I would like to be assured that in all these budget numbers, that there is a sense of clarity that all the hurdles have been passed with Fairfax County in terms of zoning, for instance. So this is like a go, so that in FY15, suddenly we don't say, holy Toledo, Fairfax has decided we can't do X. And the same thing with CDC within our own city, you know, issues about setbacks and irregular setbacks and parking on the street and all that kind of stuff. Those are all part of the school system's deliberations as it moves forward, because there is no question that the school system has some significant infrastructure needs. And given that my only experience with the school system, as they put forward a plan, was the whole CDC Mount Daniel thing that went from 50,000 to 2 million. I just want to make sure that their facilities staff are robust and sophisticated, so that what that comes before council doesn't have to be rethought and money have to be redeployed. So that's my concern about the schools. And unfortunately, nobody's here to help me with that, but I'm sure you can help me
Well, I
with that.
can give you some general comments and overview from my work with them. For Cherry Street, they have been having regular meetings with the building official and the zoning administrator, so I know they're working on how does their plans with their architects and engineers would fit within our code. So they're looking at that carefully, parking, setbacks, you know.
All that.
Site plan, grandfathered in or not. For the Mount Daniel, the reason that it's split in 2 years is the $2 million for the FY15 is to do A&E, but it's also to allow the anticipated year-long process to go through the Fairfax County process for the site plan amendment. As it currently sits, the Dewberry feasibility study did a full assessment of the zoning ordinance and by FAR what they could do, and so it is approvable conceptually within the code of Fairfax County. Still has to go through the process, and that 2 million and that 1 year is to do the design and that site plan work.
Yeah, that's a good point. There is a discussion, Johanna, in that, I don't remember the details, but they looked into that in that whole facility study. So there's some good background there if you want to look at, because it talks about what's allowable, what the density is, what the coverage ratio is, and how likely I think it would be to get exceptions for wherever they needed one. Not that anything's guaranteed, but at least it would
And that was done for.
it would let you know what questions to ask.
It's been contemplated.
Yeah. So in that big report that you picked up, Ms. Berry has it, and it's actually there for all 4 schools, the cities, plus the 3 county facilities, Mary Ellen, George Mason, and Mount Daniel.
Anything else? Yeah, let's just continue going down. Yeah, we'll come back down. Don't worry, Ira.
Nope, I'm letting them go.
You're good, Dave? No. Okay. Ira, back to you. At some point, I'll take a turn too.
We'll just wait a little.
I'm going to wait a little bit. Leave it on.
Okay, I better not mumble. Cindy, I understand that why you develop tranches for expenditure. But if you say the second part cannot go forward unless the first part is approved, then it's one project, period. The way you're funding it makes sense. It's not a tranche issue. It's that these are not independent activities, because if you don't get the approvals in the first part, the second part doesn't survive. And you can't do the second part as an independent. If these were activities that were freestanding and independent, then you can cut them accordingly to that. But as a conceptual issue, and again, we don't know what there may be legal interpretation, but in project finance, there's the total cost of the project, and then there's exactly how you finance it. What we tend to do is break down the financing and call them separate projects. And that actually, to me, as a project finance person too, really isn't what we're doing. And that's why we're pursuing this issue.
Well, I do appreciate that, and Mr. Foster has, in the memo of April 5th, did a summary statement on the legal interpretation, which is not necessarily what you're speaking to, and I know you've had many a conversation. The projects, as I've stated, do have a synergy and do cost efficiency if we run them together, but they could, if council chose not to do the rear, you could still do the front, you could still do the parking. It would change some of the benefits of the outcomes, but they could be standalone, and you could do them separately if you so choose to not to approve.
Okay. Being told it's my turn.
Your turn.
So, as far as where we're at with the operating budget, I think, the initiatives that we are pursuing make sense, and I think, in my view, we're deploying the assets strategically to put us really on the right path for economic development in the future as the market begins to turn around, and we need to get ahead of that. I think to do otherwise is going to just leave us down the road of having suboptimal projects, continued NIMBYism because there is no plan that's discussed with the community beforehand. There is no buy-in, and those plans just won't get done. We won't have the future planning staff that we desperately need. So know that there's been a lot of discussion and varying viewpoints, but I think it's critical that we get ahead of the economic curve, as we've had several development interests in the city. As members of the EDC, the Economic Development Committee of the Council know, we've had several meetings now with various developers interested in bringing their projects forward to the city. And that's going to require planners and staffing to manage that, both in the short run and in the long run as we do that. So I'm definitely supportive of those, but I think we've been very cost conscious with other cuts that we've made that have been very prudent. So I am supportive of the structure I'm seeing. I do share the concerns that were raised about, is there a way that we can stagger the salaries, just so we have a little bit better projections, but I want to get a sense of the council. I'm not wedded to one decision over the other. What I will say is, if ultimately it is the sense of the council to do the 5% now, and I'm going to base that, if I do ultimately come out that way, on the manager's recommendation. What I will say to the manager up front is, if we do have revenue changes beyond our projections that are negative, it's going to be the manager's responsibility to address those with staff. And I think in my statements last week, I was very clear with staff, if we go down this road and we do have changes in the economy, and perhaps more along the lines of, and this is a continuum of less optimism, and the projections don't come in, we may need to do less on salaries than we've projected out in the future. And I don't want to, have this be a council issue, a year from now on a budget if we do need to change the scaling. And nobody has a crystal ball. We don't know what they are. And as I mentioned, going to 5 right now has some risks that are going to have to be managed from a personnel. And I'm laying it out there right now that my expectation is that it's city staff, the city manager, and department heads that are going to have to manage that. So I just want to be very clear on that. So I think that's all I had. So on the CIP, I sort of share the frustration that we just need to be very clear about how the projects are worked out. I know that there's legal intricacies, but we are going to be facing larger projects, and I'm not going to be supportive of kind of breaking them up if they really belong as a holistic project that we have to take up with the community. So that's all I have. Others?
Yep. Good.
Ira?
Just to reiterate something that you mentioned, Nader, is if you go for the 5%, and I'm super sympathetic with the position Ms. Barry has taken, if the numbers don't produce the expected revenue, then the salary will not be as projected. Then the salaries will be adjusted to reflect that reality, and that's because we have no smoothing and no ability then to maintain. So there is, and I mentioned this at the previous meeting, you've developed and created a new exposure, which is going to 5.5 at one shot. If the revenue projections are not what we thought they would be, then there's a risk that the salary increase for next year will have to be adjusted to reflect that. And I have to ask, is that clear?
I think between you and I think we've made it abundantly clear. So, and I'll make it one step clearer. I think that, Mr. Shields, it's really important for us to communicate to you what our expectations are. My expectation is that you convey that to staff as we move forward. We're all hoping that the economy does better, but managing where things are headed, given compensations and where we've been and where we're trying to get, I think we rely on the city manager to do that based on our city council manager form of government in the city of Falls Church. So I think you've gotten council guidance on what our expectations are. And again, I'm optimistic that things are going to be very bright for the city as we move forward, especially with some interest that we're seeing on the commercial side. But again, we need to get a year or two under our belts.
Just could I be specific about the numbers, because I was the fan of the 4.5, and then January the 0.5 to 1, depending on what the economic indicators are saying. But as the mayor is talking about, and Mr. Kalin's talking about the FY14, just want to be specific that we are talking about 3% that you have baked into those numbers for salary increase. So effectively, in 2 fiscal years, we're talking about an 8.5% salary increase. Those are the numbers we're talking about, right? Just want to make sure.
That's correct.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think what we're pointing out is that depending on how
It
things
could
go,
not
there
be
may need to be
4.5,
trimming. And that's the message that we're trying to make sure the manager has about expectations.
Yep.
So if we can just stay with, I want to try to sure that we've got clear guidance on where this is, because the city staff is going to have to put the final budget documents together. Are folks amenable to leaving it at 5.5 for the beginning essentially now. Or are there requests to change that? And we can talk about it if there are.
Well, I'm comfortable with that, given where things are coming out. And just to give a little more data, somebody had asked for the CPI numbers. Just so you have them, the 12-month minus food and energy numbers for the Washington areas were in 2007, 2.9, 2008, 4.9, 2009, 1.0, 2010, 2.6, 2011, 2.3, and 2012 projection for the last 12 months, it was 2.7, went up to 2.8.
So you probably add that up and we're lagging, right?
Yeah.
Is that,
Just to give you the ballpark, yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's at least 8% for the 3 years.
Okay. And we're proposing something more modest than that. So. And that's why I wanted to see what those numbers. Thank you. Okay, I'm not hearing any, so we're leaving it 5.5. So, okay, with the discussion that we had.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. Thank you, Mayor and Council. And what I will just say is every monthly financial report will be having the discussion about revenues, and we'll be keeping our eye very closely on them and doing our FY14 planning as soon as this budget is adopted, and we're watching revenues on a monthly basis in preparation for that.
Before we, it sounds like everything's going well so far, dare I say. There is revenues that we need to discuss about how they're going to be deployed. So I think the numbers at 100,000,
Right.
100,241K. So I think the notion was putting it in a PAYGO. Mr. Shields, I think you were going to come up with specific recommendations of where to deploy that money and what types of projects.
Yeah. Well, one thing I would note at the outset is that, yes, my recommendation is that it be put towards pay-as-you-go items. We've cut those significantly in recent years, and so it's reasonable to put money back towards those. One thing that's very visible and needed is in paving. We spent $250,000 per year for many years on paving, and then we cut that to $150,000 as we went through the recession. So one option would be to simply restore that back to our historic norms of $250,000 a year, which would be roughly 2.5 lane miles of paving, along with the striping and the pedestrian markings and those types of things. Just as one example of the cuts to the paving budget, we've cut everything out of our parking lot maintenance, and the parking lot behind Argia's has been you can't tell where to park right now, and it's not a safe situation. But that's an area where we've really cut very deeply in our budget, and we're gonna cobble together some money to be able to do that later this spring. But that's just as an example of where we've cut there. Other options, if the council wants to explore other options, would be additional funding for facilities maintenance and additional money for stormwater maintenance, both of which already are in the CIP, but we'd augment the funding for those to continue the work that's already laid out in the CIP for those.
I can I'm happy to go first and share my thoughts. Deploying on areas that we've neglected certainly makes sense. And again, we had really scaled back a lot of our work, which is actually just, puts us at exposure for items down the line and increases our risk for failure in the infrastructure. So certainly road improvements make sense. I would like to see some of the money being deployed towards stormwater management if we've got the capacity to do that. I know that there may be a staff capacity there, but I'd like to see both worked on. Others? Johanna?
Yeah, given that this is a one-time opportunity here, I guess my preference is to see it deployed to a discrete and finite, opportunity. That, so it's not built into, a long-term expectation. So I leave it to staff. I mean, obviously, given the stormwater situation, I would lean towards stormwater. And I actually don't know the answer to this, which is why I turn to staff. In a parking lot such as Argia's, What responsibility does, say, Robertson Property and Argia's have? Is that their parking lot? It's our parking lot.
It's their lot, and I'll speak frankly that I think we should have an agreement with them because money that we spend there goes really for the benefit of those businesses. Nonetheless, we don't have that agreement in place right now, and they're looking to us to maintain our property. I think that what we could do is say, let's take care of the problem right now, but going forward, let's have an agreement where we're going to share this or have a more reasonable arrangement on this, I think.
Mr. Shields, you may want to contact the business owners there. They may be taking proactive steps to address the situation as like very soon.
Okay.
So it's my possibly. So okay. Others on the 100,000. So I think stormwater, possibly with some roads, is where we're headed on that. And Mr. Shields, one thing, and I sent you a note about it earlier. I was on Nolan Street earlier this evening, where there's paving going on, and I was going to raise this in my council comments, but there's been issues with lack of traffic control, trucks moving with no signage being put at the wrong side or at the wrong location because of where the hill is and not being visible. Lots of safety issues there, and I think our folks have come out a couple times based on calls. I understand that the inspectors have come out. So if we have a contract oversight issue, we need to consider that. I know that there's going to be other milling and paving going on in the adjacent streets. We may need to have a sit down with the community there to figure out what's been happening, what the problems are, so it's not happening in other areas. But apparently there's been a lot of difficulty there, including work crews leaving materials that shouldn't be there, like trash, etc. And these are not our crews; these are whoever the contractor is. But we need to work on the oversight, it sounds like. And if we're going to be doing more milling and paving, we need to examine what's happening there.
Okay, I will look into that and report back.
Okay. Other council members on the 100K? Okay.
Does
that give you enough, Mr. Shields?
Well, you want to talk about ratios?
Right.
What portion to paving and what portion to stormwater?
What's the need? Yeah. What are the needs?
The stormwater, we do have. We've laid out how much money we're putting towards maintenance. So, I mean, one split I think could be 75% for paving and 25% for stormwater. And I can come back and say specifically what that's going to get us if we want to leave it at that, and I can provide that report back to council.
Fine. I mean, I'm happy for you to look at even a 50-50 and what that gets us. It's not a huge sum of money for a big project, so what makes sense?
Okay.
So just come up with what makes sense. As far as what is in the ordinance, does it matter?
Yes, it will matter in the final ordinance because, no, actually, they're both in Public Works.
Okay. So you have enough flexibility to move in within Public Works. So we don't need to say we're voting on an exact ratio. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although I think it would be...
we should know.
Yes.
So,
I think it'd be useful for public communication to be able to say what we're able to deliver with this.
That's great. So we'll expect that on the 23rd.
All right.
All right. Anything else? Okay. So unless anybody wants any parting shots, I think we've generally coalesced around the budget and the CIP. So, and I know not everybody's in agreement, but I think we have general majority agreement on the way ahead.
I have an unrelated question.
Okay.
I mean, when you finish.
So, okay. So that takes care of the budget, pending obviously public comment between now and the 23rd. Mr. Callen?
In that area, we were going to sell some land behind Argia's, and then we decided not to because the power company turned out that they could use it anyway. But I see construction going on back there with a basketball court and a concrete flat top and a fairly elaborate fence. What is going on?
There is a partial roundabout at the end of Park Avenue. Park Avenue goes right by the State Theater, and that, in Park Place rather, and that roundabout is something that the city requested as part of an action back in the 1980s. The way that was resolved was that the property owner asked for permission. He first wanted to buy it from the city, and we looked at it. We decided not to sell it, but we did grant license and a permission to put landscaping and a driveway on top of that portion of the roundabout, noting that at any time, if the city needs to put a transformer or other utility type of things in that area, that we are not giving up our rights to do that, and that the homeowner acknowledges that. So the point was that in the future, if we were to need to underground those overhead utilities and build a parking structure back there, and we needed to place a transformer somewhere, we could place it on this city-owned property.
But it is so elaborate. I mean, this doesn't make any sense for something that could be, it is a large concrete slab with a very heavy-duty basketball court and a very well-constructed with stone pillar around the fence. Somebody's going to invest in that for something that could be taken away. There must be more money in the city than I thought. I mean, does anybody tracking? That's certainly not a roundabout anymore. It's a basketball court.
It's never functioned as a roundabout, and one of the things about that was that all a roundabout would facilitate is the subdivision of that property. And I don't.
Well, I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying,
we
what
could
does
see
we
no
have?
public purpose why we'd want those historic properties to be subdivided. And so the question was, were we going to not have any future role in that roundabout area? We're going to reserve it so we could put some infrastructure back there, and that was the resolution. And what we did accomplish was make it very clear in the document trail that the homeowner understands that the city has the right and the ability to do that in the future.
And that understands by contract. How does the homeowner know that?
Well, it's recorded that the city owns it, so that's how any future
That
owner would
construction
know.
there is awesome. Oh, that's amazing. Okay, I'll take your word for it. This is like NBA quality there.
All right, there's nothing else on the budget. Why don't we move to the calendar and comments? So just on the calendar, what I would propose that we do is on the lead policy resolution. Sorry, as far as the calendar goes, I propose that we take the lead policy resolution and put that actually on the schedule for
Hip, hip.
May 7th.
Well, wait a minute. Could it go to boards and commissions before May 7th? Because right now it's circulated, right? Because I just don't want it to come to council on May 7th for referral to boards and commissions when boards and commissions have already looked at it.
So you would propose that we advance it to the 23rd?
Well, of course, that's my favorite. Oh, I see. I'm sorry. May 7th is the next meeting. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was trying to put it at the next work
Okay,
session.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay, so why don't we put it on the 27th, and then from there, it could move?
On the 7th.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, we could potentially vote on it. It would be sort of unusual
No, that's
to refer
fine.
out, but we could potentially refer it out on the 7th if we're ready to do that. Because it would be just a resolution, right?
That's correct.
So we could do a referral. Little unusual for us, but doesn't mean we can't do it.
And the 20-year study, would that be a resolution for the 23rd, or what time would it be?
I'm sorry, Mr. Kalin.
For the idea of getting the 20-year plan, that we were going to ask for that study, where would we specifically ask for that?
I was going to work with Mr. LeCondre and Mr. Shields to do something similar to what we did last year, so that it'd be part of the adopted CIP ordinance. If you recall, council directed before any renovation money could be spent, and this year we had to come back with the plan, and so we had it built into the now therefore be it. So I was going to work to develop language and put it there. And there was one other CIP intent thing that we could also put in there.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. Is this a city facilities or school facilities or both?
Mike.
I guess, you tell me. I thought it was a master facility.
My recommendation would be a master one that integrates the general government and the school. So that would be library, community center, Aurora House, City
the whole
Hall,
thing.
property yard, all 5 schools
Right.
with Cherry
Why-
Street.
Why don't we do this, Cindy? Once we get through the budget, if you can just think of having a memo on this again, and I hate to put staff, and I'm not looking for an extensive memo, but it may be helpful for council to see sort of a plan to address the facilities plan, if that makes sense, and just put it in the context when the dates are, when decision points are, when work sessions are. Is that what you're getting at, Mr. Kalin?
Be glad to do that, especially if you wanted to tie it
Yes.
into the next year budget cycle. We need to wrap it up by the end of this
Yeah, I mean-
calendar year, so it's in the
Right.
next CIP.
Yeah, I mean, we did the Dewsbury, which was like enormous, and the price tags were not within range at all of affordability. So I think now we need to really begin to work on this again, and let's not wait until the budget cycle again. Let's hit it in the very beginning. So, and I think that there's 2 things that we really need to get working on. One was the revenue sharing, sort of the open issues that we're trying to sort out, and then facilities, certainly all of city facilities and school facilities master planning, and getting those on a track for decision making and where the decision points are. Ms. Berry.
I understand that, because I've had, as city staff is aware, I've had correspondence with Dr. Jones on this, significant master plan, several hundred pages of the plan. It's thoughtful, there's lots of rationale there, but it doesn't include, the high school. So, I think that's going to be obviously a critical piece in all of this, is making sure that the master plan does include the high school, and that, we see the big picture. But this is not to say that the schools have not put something together, and it was my understanding that they thought they could have something that was fairly robust before the Planning Commission by late April or May, because I believe it was the Planning Commission that said they wanted to see a more robust plan for the high school than what has been referred to as the placeholder. Is that correct? Is that?
I believe that is correct. The Planning Commission did ask for it. Other than coming back with an update, there's not a formal item before the Planning Commission. I would recommend that as the schools do their part, and we've got a lot of data on both sides, the bottom line, as Mr. Kalin pointed out, it needs to become an integrated one so that council could see the big picture of what we need to do for a high school or a library and so forth.
All right, anything else, council, on requests and calendars? All right, any comments? Okay. If I can get, talk about that?
Well, it was pretty great.
Yeah.
That's all I can say.
Mike?
I had set out to council, one of the things I was asked to do by the library was participate in the PEEPS review, and I think it was a task fitting my unique set of skills, apparently. And it was a great deal of fun. It was open from kindergarten to senior high, but only it went from kindergarten to 6th grade, and we saw some extraordinary deployment of PEEPS along a. There was not. But I will tell you, there were great books. PEEPS. There was a Moby Dick PEEP. There was a Wizard of Oz. Then there were some sort of obscure girl books that I haven't read, but there was all kinds of. It's great stuff. Good stuff.
All right.
Great stuff.
Thanks, Ms. Berry. Anything else by council members? All right, if I can get a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody, and thanks for a rather smooth budget process. Sorry,
Well, Thursday.
sorry, not that we have to reopen, but I don't see a need for a Thursday meeting.
I don't-
We have PED plan on,
Yes,
so.
we have PED plan. Big.
So I would encourage council members to attend the PED plan at 7:30.
The 7:30 at the community center or something like that?
off the top of my head, but I'll get it out.
Okay.
You wanna
Ne-
close down his,
Yeah. Now we are officially adjourned.